You want to make sure your new radiator has not been damaged during shipping. These are very thin, very fragile components, often shipped from overseas. Make sure this is a good one before you drain all the coolant out of your old one. Later, towards the end of this project, you'll want to lift the front end really high. This will assist in burping the coolant bubbles out of the radiator. You can go ahead and put it on ramps now, or we could do it at the end, but you'll definitely want to plan ahead and make sure you have those ramps. You'll want to have a cold engine for this, but we're going to open the radiator cap. Do not lose this cap. Chances are your new radiator does not include a cap. Next, you'll want to drain the radiator. Yes, this is very messy, even with a tub. I believe there's going to be about 3 gallons of coolant in there, so be prepared to get wet. And of course, do not lose this plug, as your new radiator may not have one. You want to observe what color your coolant is. There's milky or chunky or snot-like debris floating inside of this, or maybe it's pink or red, then it may indicate further issues with oil or trans fluid getting in your coolant. This looks okay. You should probably have a hose coming right here next to the radiator cap. Go ahead and disconnect this hose. I'll have 2 radiator hoses. I want to go ahead and remove those. This is a good time to inspect the condition of your hoses for cracks and other damage. Of course, you'll remove your other coolant line, and always anticipate coolant to spill out of these hoses. Many cars have transcooler lines running to the radiator. Others have their own independent transmission coolers. On the 2nd generation Pathfinders, transcoolers come from below the oil pan and run into these 2 lines. Runs along right here to a connection right there. This one has been broke off. I'm not using it. If it existed, it would look like this connector right here, which would connect to this hose. Behind the radiator, I have its own standalone transcooler. This is part of the reason I'm replacing this radiator, so I can go back to a more stock configuration of my transcooler. I would recommend using vice grips or some sort of clamp to clamp off these transmission fluid hoses so you don't dump out all your transmission fluid. With your transmission hoses and your coolant hoses disconnected and the radiator drained, begin disassembling this radiator. There's going to be some brackets we remove. You also want to remove this fan shroud, and I found making things easy is getting down in here and removing the bolts that hold the fan to the fan pulley. You want to use a 10mm wrench to remove these. The fan may turn while you're loosening these nuts, so you'll just have to use your other hand to hold it still. There we go. There's 4 of these nuts. With all 4 nuts removed, go ahead and start pulling the fan forward. Be sure not to drop it. The blades are plastic. It's okay if it just sits right there out of the way. On the 2nd generation Pathfinder, the fan shroud is held in by 2 bolts. One right here, one right here, which on mine is broken. Let's remove those. At this point, with your trans coolers clamped off, disconnected, we're going to lift up on the fan shroud. It's got a little peg right there, peg right there. Go ahead and lift it up and back. And at the top, disconnect the hose. And you'll want to disconnect your throttle cable if you have a throttle cable. Some of you do not have a throttle cable. The fan may impede your progress when pulling up on the fan shroud, so you may have to just go ahead and pull that fan out. Put the fan shroud out of the way. Now we're going to undo the radiator. These 2 nuts right here, 10 millimeters. Brackets lift off. With the top of the radiator disconnected, we're simply just going to lift up. With it disconnected, we'll lift it out to the top. Installation of the new radiator is just the reversal of the removal. You're going to start by dropping the posts down in these brackets. If your new radiator does not come with the little grommets or bushings, you want to go ahead and steal those from your old radiator and install those. With the little grommets installed, now we'll move up top and connect the top. With the radiator secured up top and bottom, now we will reinstall the shroud. It'll orientate like this, with this outward face facing the grill. Be careful not to drag this across the fins of the new radiator. Partially insert the new fan shroud, and then leave a gap to where you can install the fan. With the fan installed over the studs, go ahead and install the nuts. You may have to crawl under the vehicle to continue tightening. With the fan tightened and secured, resume installing the fan shroud. When the fan shroud is secure up top, come underneath and drop the pegs in the hole of the radiator. On top, you will need to secure the fan shroud to the radiator in two places, here and here. Mine is broken, so I will not be reattaching it from that location. Replace your throttle cable and then begin replacing your hoses. The new radiator may have your transcooler connectors plugged off with a piece of disposable plastic. Gently remove this piece. Be careful, this connector is soft aluminum and will break. Install the transcooler line to your radiator. Note that the driver's side transcooler line on the radiator stays on the driver's side. With everything reinstalled, all the hoses connected, top and bottom, everything secured, we will then begin the filling and burping process of the cooling system. One thing to note is for this cap will be removed, and if you have a 2001, this bolt will be removed. These are relief valves that assist with filling and burping the engine. If you have a 2002 or later, you do not have any sort of plug on the front pipe. You will always, however, have the one on the back. With the cap removed, ensure that the inside of this tube is not clogged. Many times they are clogged. This one is clogged. So use a flexible piece of material to run down in there to open that up. If the radiator stops accepting new fluid before the relief valve spills coolant, you may need to put your hand over the radiator cap and use your other hand to squeeze this hose right here and watch the relief valve in the back to see if coolant spews from it. You may more likely need to do this if your front end of the vehicle is not lifted up high enough. After the relief valve has relieved some coolant and we are at full at the radiator cap, we will replace the relief valve cap and the associated hose clamp that goes with that. You will want to add coolant to your reservoir until it reaches the cold mark. or I'm sorry, the minimum mark, and you will then cap this off. So with a little bit of coolant added here, coolant present here, and a relief capped off, we will go inside the truck. Start the engine. We will turn our climate control on to hot. We will be watching up there at the radiator for coolant bubbling out. We're also going to be watching our temperature gauge. Keep track of the time, because we will only be running the engine long enough just to warm this up, open the thermostat. Difficulty getting your climate control to cooperate with putting out lots of heat on already warm days. Something to keep in mind. This would be best done on cooler days. The thermostat should be partially open now, so I'm going to go ahead and give it some revs. I'm going to go about 2,500 to 3,000 RPMs. Keeping an eye on the radiator. I'm going to rev this for about 10 seconds. This helps expel air bubbles. Alright, now we're going to shut it off, let it cool down. Cool down, top it off, squeeze the hoses, top off some more, replace your cap, restart the engine. Start your car and sit with it and make sure that it does not overheat. Go for a drive. Start out at low speed nearby your house and everything goes well. Move to faster roads and eventually highways just to make sure this does not overheat.